grievance politics are, Taplines listener? Sure you do. It's the practice of mobilizing people into a backlash based on their shared anger about something new. Also known as the politics of resentment, or the standard Republican playbook since Nixon, it's a powerful bulwark against social progress in this country. How powerful? Well, just ask Anheuser-Busch InBev. The Bud Light fiasco of 2023 was a genuine phenomenon, not only to the American beer business, but to the entire world of consumer-facing commerce. There are many ways of understanding what went down: a corporate communications catastrophe, a billion-dollar sales slide, the consequences of wokeness run amok, and so forth. Having covered all those angles over the course of the past 18 months, I think most of them have varying degrees of merit, but the cohesive explanation for the shit show America's best-selling beer brand stumbled into in April 2023 is greater than the sum of those parts. Bud Light got rolled by conservative, transphobic grievance politics, and frankly, they should have seen it coming. In 2014, Atlantic staff writer Charlie Warzel was working as an editor at BuzzFeed's now-defunct Hard News division when a group of trolls from radicalized internet forums like 4chan, aggrieved by shifting demographics of video game companies and media that covered them, launched coordinated harassment campaigns against female gaming reporters and pressured theoretically sophisticated corporate sponsors of their publications to pull their ads under false, bad faith pretenses. This came to be known as GamerGate, and it was proof positive that grievance politics deployed online could have real-world effects. 5 years later, in 2019, Charlie filed a column as writer-at-large for the New York Times opinion section, arguing that the online mob that did GamerGate, quote, created a playbook for the culture war. He was right. Charlie joins the show today for a wide-ranging, cross-discipline episode to discuss how GamerGate's style of extremely online grievance politics has come to be the dominant playbook for conservative backlash, why it works so well, and why companies like ABI, with all the resources in the world and a decade to learn how to brace against these bad faith attacks, keep falling for them. It's Charlie Warzel, it's Bud Light, it's Anheuser-Busch InBev's GamerGate moment, and it's all right here, right now, on VinePair's Taplines. Welcome to Taplines, Charlie Warzel.
Thank you for having me.
Charlie, is it okay if I call you Charlie? What's your byline, Charles or Charlie?
Oh, Charlie.
Yeah, Charlie.
All Charlie all the time. Yeah.
Do you have a plan to switch to Charles as you grow older and more prestigious and august?
No, God, no.
You haven't thought that far ahead?
I came out into the world as a Charlie, like don't take this guy too seriously.
Yeah.
It's essentially, like I appreciate that about the name.
Very good. Well, we're going to take you seriously today, Charlie. Where are you joining us from here in the Taplines virtual studio?
I am right outside of Bellingham, Washington. So we are about as far north as you can get and not be in Alaska in the United States. Near British Columbia, a little above Seattle. There is a massive, there's like 150 craft breweries in this town.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot going on in
some
Bellingham.
of our listeners probably run those craft breweries, at least a few of those craft breweries.
It feels to me like, so I used to live in Missoula, Montana, which is, chock full of amazing craft breweries. And then I moved here and it felt like somehow like the density like of brewery per like 10 people went up, and I didn't think that was possible, but it's a great place to be. You
can't even do like brewery per 100,000 people, like the normal per capita, because there simply aren't 100,000 people to fucking divide by.
Right, exactly. The denominator gets very weird when you get in there. But yes, no, it's great. Pacific Northwest, I don't think there's a better place to be in the summer, and there's definitely a better place to be in the winter. So that's where we're at right now.
And as long as the atmospheric river does not slow through, you're sitting pretty, and you're sitting pretty right now. For those of you listeners who are not watching on our YouTube channel, Charlie's got a beautiful Pacific Northwest backdrop framing up his video screen. I wish I was there. I just have a bunch of fucking books behind me. But
it's so cold right now. Like just the water. Like it's so like the East Coast, the Midwest. Like lived in those places, it's very like it gets really cold, and it doesn't get that cold here, but the water aspect of it is basically just like you live in like a 40-degree cloud for 6 months.
Right.
And so you're just like wet cold.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you're slowly
that's the
getting
weather
like
report.
cold smoked, like a fucking lox salmon, basically.
Yeah. And I have the skin to show it. You know?
Well, Charlie, we're not here to talk about your skincare routine, although you look resplendent, as we were discussing before we get on today. Beautiful. We're here to talk about a momentous occasion in the American craft beer business, as we do here on Taplines. We're going to get into that in just a moment, but I'm hoping we can start. We talked a little bit about the craft brewing scene in Bellingham and in Missoula, but let's talk a little bit about your relationship with beer. Are you a drinker, Charlie? What's your vibe as it pertains to the beverage in question?
Oh, I love to drink.
Shout out to beers.
Shout out to beers. Shout out to beers. Getting me through. We'll talk about what I cover, but yeah, it's the carrot at the end of a long day of like watching neo-Nazis post on the internet. You're like, I'm gonna tuck into a beverage now and hopefully forget half of what I've seen.
You didn't start drinking on the beat, did you? I presume you started drinking before the beat. Yeah.
I did.
Where did it start for you? What's your journey?
The journey is, it's very standard.
On your 21st birthday, obviously.
It's actually not standard. Yes, exactly. On my 21st birthday, I had my first beer, and it was amazing, and it's been moderation ever since. I had this weird thing where I was a January admit in my college. So I had a semester off, and the school, like my first semester was off. And the school was like, you could do essentially study abroad your first semester of college if you want in this program in London. And so I went to London literally for my first semester of college with a whole bunch of strangers who I met there. And they were all like, high school partiers and stuff. I was not. And I got introduced essentially in like my first hour of being in London to like pubs, and just immediately like that's what I fell in love with when it comes to like drinking is like a good atmosphere, right?
Cozy,
like a cozy, but also just neighborhoody, right? And this idea of drinking much more as just like as a social thing. Like I didn't do the sort of high school party scene thing. For me, it was just sort of almost immediately just very like there's a place where you go and you do it to just like connect with people, right? And then, obviously we were like 18, so we just got shit-faced, but
up until then it was the platonic ideal,
Yes, it was
at that point of the story, right until you said that last part, that was like the platonic ideal that the industry pitches about, like this is actually how most people drink. It's just very moderate, very social, very whatever. It's like I'll have 17 Guinness actually also.
Yes. It was like, oh, that's a Jaeger bomb? Sure, I'll try that. So yeah, but it really was like, it was awesome in that way. Like we immediately got to know like bartenders, and it was just this kind of like, there's an ecosystem around this that is really cool and worth preserving. And like, I basically ever since like, I'm like in love with bars essentially. Right. And just like, I love just like being there, like a good bar always just feels like you're spending your day right,
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I feel like that's certainly something that I can relate to. I'm sure our listeners out there can relate to this idea of bars and to some extent tap rooms. I feel like bars are the sort of paragon there, but as kind of the ideal third place experience if you can get a good one. And it sounds like you found a bunch of good ones when you were over across the pond in London. Where did you go to school, Charlie? You were like
I went to Hamilton College, which is a small liberal arts school,
upstate New York.
Upstate New York, yeah.
Is that a NESCAC
near
school?
Syracuse.
Yeah, I think that's a NESCAC school. If I'm not mistaken,
it is a NESCAC school.
In the NESCAC,
yeah. right in this weird part of the snow belt where you just like every place around you didn't get that much snow, and like for some reason Clinton, New York would just get
getting
pummeled.
pounded.
But right outside of Utica, home to Utica Club, Saranac.
Yes, of course. FX Matt listeners, we had Fred Matt on the podcast not so long ago to talk about the FX Matt company's beer ball. You ever come across a beer ball, Charlie, or no?
No.
They were making these, they were literally, like foot in diameter, like plastic, like vessels, basically, that they would just fill with fucking beer, and people, instead of kegs, basically, and people would just buy them, and they were a huge novelty in like the late 80s, early 90s. They did not last. There's no beer balls have gone the way of so many other industry innovations consigned to that great sorting heap in the sky. But you were in that neck of the woods, man.
I went to Hamilton with Frank Matt, so I don't know if that's his son or like
one of the
uncle
Matts
or someone. One of the Matts. Yeah,
okay.
So yeah. But anyway, I love the best thing about. I mean, there's a lot of great things about like Utica Club and all that, but the best thing is like the 30 or the 24 rack that comes in essentially a suitcase. Like it literally looks like you could handcuff it to your wrist. And there was just a lot of like very serious, like I got to deliver this package.
Right. Right. I'm doing business. Yeah.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. Handcuff it to your wrist as though anyone wanted to steal it. Although I guess maybe undergrads at Hamilton College might have wanted to steal it from you.
Yeah, man.
A hot commodity.
It was like a prisoner exchange every time,
That's how I do my social drinking, as a hostage situation. It's me in there and everyone else is stuck with me until the case is gone. Yeah.
Yeah, the action is the juice,
That's right. All right. Enough banter. Let's get down to bullshit, Charlie. We're here to talk today about another light beer, one that reached, sort of much higher heights than Utica Club or even Miller Lite or Coors Light ever did. I'm talking, of course, about Bud Light, introduced in 1982 as Budweiser Light. They lopped the Weiser off in 84, I think. They realized it sounded better as just Bud Light. Bud Light was, until very recently, and still is, if you loop in draft sales, the best-selling beer in the United States. It's held that position unbroken for 3 decades or so. And it defined to no small extent the light macro lager category that many of us, with the exception of Charlie, who lucked out and really started his drinking career in earnest over in London with Guinness, many of us were introduced to beer with either Bud Light or one of its rivals, Miller Lite, Coors Light, maybe a Stroh's, something or other, depending on where you were in the country. But this style became the dominant style of American beer over the back half of the 20th century, and through the first a few years of the 21st century, Bud Light led the way, and it's produced by Anheuser-Busch, which in 2008 becomes Anheuser-Busch InBev. It is a big blue money-making machine for the company, and our listeners know, because we've talked about it obliquely in other episodes, and also because they pay attention to the beer business, that in 2023, Bud Light ran into a brick wall sales-wise, and took an historic swoon, really stumbled and has yet to fully regain its mojo, maybe never will, as we're recording this at the end of 2024, some 18 months later. I'm talking about the conservative boycott, backlash, transphobic carnival, whatever you want to call it, that emerged on April Fool's Day 2023 after a trans influencer, Dylan Mulvaney, posted a brief social media video showing her face on a custom sort of one-off can of Bud Light that either Bud Light brand managers or one of their third-party agencies or whatever had sent to her. Charlie, that's a big windup, and you, or maybe our listeners, maybe you know already, but our listeners may be wondering, cool, like, why do you have Charlie, whose work is on a, it's an excellent beat that you work, and it's a vital one, and you do terrific work on it, but it's not really the beer beat. But the reason you're here is because when shit went south for Bud Light and for Anheuser-Busch InBev, and good God, it did, the contours of that controversy, that scandal, that shit show, really started to represent or parallel, mimic that of another controversy that you've done an enormous amount of work trying to report out, to explicate, to contextualize within the broader zeitgeist. I'm talking about GamerGate. Charlie, for listeners who are lucky enough to not be terminally online, and maybe they're lucky enough to work, with their hands out in the great outdoors, whatever. They don't have to spend every day in front of a computer like us poor ink-stained wretches. Can you tell us a little bit, for the uninformed, what GamerGate is? Yeah,
so GamerGate is a controversy, sort of far-right manosphere activist movement that started in the summer of 2014. And basically, in August of 2014, this 20-something ex-boyfriend who was very angry at his ex-girlfriend wrote almost a 10,000-word blog post. And the post documented the last weeks of his breakup with this woman, Zoe Quinn, who is a video game designer. And the whole thing was like wildly annotated with screenshots of like their private messages and emails and Facebook messages and texts, and rehashed their sexual histories, like really just like an overshare, right?
This is
just like a
crank behavior, basically.
And just like scorned, young male, posting online, posting through it, right? Never ends well, right? And this, is something that probably it happens a lot in these really small ways. But it was around a moment where like the social part of the internet was really starting to like cherry pick these small little things that happened, right? Like kind of in the vein of like Fox News, which is like, somebody at a Denny's, in Peoria, like does something, and then like Fox News blows it into a big controversy. The little message boards and corners of the internet were starting to like do that, like takes these representative things out. And so a bunch of people,
or things that weren't representative, but hold them up as representative.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, that's better way to put it. And so what ended up happening was Reddit and 4chan kind of like latched onto this blog post because of the fact that Zoe was a video game designer, right? And so
was she famous? Like, was there any prominence whatsoever at the beginning of this? Like, not really, right?
That's not like certainly not a household name. I don't think so. I mean, the best answer is like, I don't really know. And I think it actually, though, the reason I say that is it speaks a little to, like, just kind of set the stage of this. Like, I was working at the time as the technology editor at BuzzFeed News, and I had a reporter my friend who was working alongside me, Joe Bernstein, who was he was hired there to cover video games, but very quickly and like right sort of in a like considering and reporting on video games as like art, right? Or like as an artistic medium.
You're right.
And taking it really seriously. And as a result, because games were just like have been so enmeshed with online culture, he started covering online culture. And so what ended up happening...
You ruined his life, just as an aside. Like, he came on to do video games and immediately...
Hey, listen, it wasn't me that ruined his life. What ruined his life is that he's a really good reporter and has a really excellent way of like contextualizing this stuff and getting information. So, so the big point, though, that they seized on in these Reddit and 4chan threads is that Quinn had a relationship with a writer for the gaming site Kotaku. And so this was like a point in the thing. And this conjured basically this conspiracy theory that Quinn had slept with gaming journalists in return for good coverage. Like the writer in question for Kotaku never wrote about the games that she was involved with, and that didn't matter. So there was this false premise of video game and journalistic industry collusion. And essentially like the particulars aren't necessarily that important, but basically what happens is it goes from this small, controversy on some of these message boards and just grows out and grows out. And it becomes kind of like, the classic corkboard, red string conspiracy theory thing where it's like, this goes all the way to the top, right? So like female gaming critics, like Anita Sarkeesian is another one. Game designer or designers like Brianna Wu, like people just got plucked out and like their online history searched, their correspondence searched, and there was this understanding, I think what we would call like not only like the game collusion and the sort of the journalistic malpractice and all this, but also this kind of idea, right, of like what we now call wokeness or what people call wokeness rather in gaming, right? And this idea that the culture that should be like by bros for bros, or like by guys who like Call of Duty for guys who like Call of Duty, like that there was this idea that their culture was being diluted by a different, brand of people. And instead of just sort of acknowledging that or saying, hey, that's, those games aren't for me or that type of thing, it was like, no, this is an attack. There's an enemy within, and it totally spiraled out, like harassment campaigns, and essentially became like this. It got big enough. There were Reddit forums and threads that spun up in like, I think it was called Kotaku in Action, but it was like dedicated, like a GamerGate, board for this, and it got outside of the confines of weirdos on the internet and into broader mainstream discourse. And I think the reason why we still talk about GamerGate now, the reason why I've done a lot of like retrospective taking a look at it, is because it really was the template, like one of the first instances of right-wing harassment that showed and gave people an understanding that like if we make certain people's lives so miserable, if we make enough noise, eventually people with power, eventually the media, like people will take notice. They won't have all of the context that I just gave to you, and they'll probably cover it in a way that's either favorable to us or amplify the story enough that we can sort of continue to recruit more people. And so that is essentially like the super cliff notes of GamerGate and why sort of we're fighting GamerGate on every level all the time. in every issue.
Yeah, that's a good sort of way to put a bow on it, because I think a lot of listeners who maybe weren't familiar with GamerGate nevertheless recognize a lot of the tenets of the campaign, of the fiasco, of whatever you want to call it, that emerged in that summer of 2014, because that is basically the case. You wrote a story in 2019, 5-year anniversary story about GamerGate that ran in the New York Times, where you were at that. What were you, an opinion writer at large, I think was your title there? Yeah, at the time you filed a story under the banner of everything is GamerGate now, and the idea of like trying to make sense of this, what seemed to be a one-off fiasco or a one-off sort of tantrum that would, has since come to define the way socio-political discourse unfolds online, was something that in 2019, I think you grappled with like quite a bit. And then another 5 years later in 2024, we're still grappling with it. I mean, the dimension is sprawling and it, continues to kind of infect or at least inflect everything we do online. Did you know at the time that it was going to be another fucking 10 years of this shit?
Oh, no way. I mean, I think that like, so the reason why, rather than saying the reason why, like what happened for me personally, and I don't totally want to speak for him, but I think I can in this sense, like with Joe Bernstein, the reporter who was really truly like far, like he took it seriously, right? When I remember him bringing the story to like a meeting and like talking, and of course your initial impulse as like a human being who's not in these worlds is like, what?
Right,
like it's just
right.
it's kind of like this impenetrable controversy. But what he was seeing and what like the kind of the genius of him at the time was like, no, like these networks, right? Like social media was being exploited and people were using it to mobilize and to sort of amplify this issue, right?
Yeah.
To make it bigger, to draw in more people, like sort of there were issues of outrage and sort of like online mobs before to some degree. But this was the perfect storm in some ways, and he saw that coming. And so, when I did some back reporting on this and talking to people who study online harassment and who study, far right dynamics and things like that, like academically, they pointed me to this fact that like what was happening was there was essentially influencer types. We didn't call them influencers then, but guys who posted a lot online, a lot of like pickup artist guys, a lot of people who were trying to get young men to listen to them in some way, or even like just like content marketers who are like trying to find their niche, just like throwing shit at the wall everywhere, trying to see what sticks. Those people like saw the engagement that was possible if you posted about this, right? If you said like, oh man, like look at this blog post from this game designer, and like not about games, right? About like social justice issues, and like, oh, look at this this quote unquote screed about feminism, and like this is the person who's trying to say that like we can't have chesty women in our video games, right? And like boom, 100 retweets at the time, right? For a guy who's never gotten more than like 5 likes. And it's like, oh, okay, there's like something here, right? And it wasn't clear that it was like money or anything, but it was like influence. And so what ended up happening was it was one of the earlier moments on social media where you essentially had harassment influencers, right? Like people who were doing a lot of like the dirty work of the internet were often anonymous, right? Like that's just the anonymous troll, don't feed the trolls, don't whatever, right? And this was like guys like Roosh, Mike Cernovich, political commentators, and Christina Hoff Sommers, Milo Yiannopoulos. Like this was a huge moment for Milo Yiannopoulos as like, finding this audience and saying like, okay, like these are the people that I can like really, like I can twist the knife here and rile up a lot of people. Yeah. And they will see me as, crusading on their behalf. Yeah. And so I think that was a huge moment. Like that and it's not just like the weirdos who pay attention to this, like Steve Bannon, who, was running Breitbart for a while. He had this, like he told a journalist in 2017 that essentially like Milo Yiannopoulos activated the young disaffected right men with GamerGate, and that they used that as like, the open door from which they could be like, well, let me tell you about this guy, Donald Trump, let me tell you about like what it would mean to make America great again and what they've taken from you. Like,
I have some pamphlets I'd like you to review. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so it's not to say that like GamerGate gave us like Trump or something like that, but it really gave, it was proof of concept for a style of culture warring that was very clearly exciting to a demographic of people who were going to be extremely loud, extremely vocal, and extremely big content creators for a political movement.
And they were online, which was crucial, right? And like in 2014, and this is something I think is very germane to the conversation about how Anheuser-Busch InBev got rolled in the Bud Light fiasco. But like back in 2014, being like fucking torched online did not necessarily have a lot of, sort of history for offline consequences. In other words, like there was not like a huge track record of like people, losing their jobs because of shit they posted. There was certainly some of that. I'm thinking sort of like the text on that one is Justine Sacco, who, remember that tweet? That was like, I think maybe 2013 or so ish.
Yeah.
The woman who, a listener in this, obviously I'm too online. I think Charlie is steeped in this stuff as well. But if you're not, like this woman tweeted about, the joke was like, fly in Africa, hope I don't get AIDS or something. She posted this on Twitter, turned her phone off for 18 hours to like fly to, South Africa or wherever she was headed. And then like turned her phone back on and like she had been just drawn and quartered online. She'd been fucking fired. Like it was a mess. Like it was and this was like it was what we would later come, the parlance would evolve around this, and people, this is what being canceled, looked like before anyone really knew it. But that was not nearly the sort of familiar concept that it now is. Yes. And it's sort of become a parody of itself now. But in 2014, was GamerGate boiling over into the offline consequences at that time? Like how did this stuff manifest in sort of quote unquote the real world? Was the real world downstream of online, or was it still upstream of online?
I mean, there were definitely like consequences, like reputational consequences, but for the people involved and the harassment therein, it didn't quite it didn't quite rise to the level that we see now necessarily, right? But what it did do is it achieved quite a bit of mainstream media coverage. Right? That was something that that seemed to that's what they took notice of the most, right? Like I kind of go through in that article, I was like looking back at it, and there were the template was then used to drum up public sentiment and then like try to get things canceled, right? Like in the aftermath of Gamergate is when you see basically the proto Bud Light harassment campaigns or online outrage mob stuff, like against Home Depot, against Nike, against the NFL. There was like all the Gamergate people got together essentially, like one last job, right? To get Intel to like pull gaming ads.
In Adobe too. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then you saw it all over the place. Like my absolute favorite one.
You're a connoisseur of this stuff.
The sheer ridiculousness. Yeah. Yes. I am a cancellation sommelier. It was in 2017. I can't remember the particulars, but Sean Hannity was furious at Keurig.
Oh, this was a classic.
For being too woke, and there were just like online. There were like hundreds of videos of like dudes in Make America Great Again hats, like just throwing their Keurigs out like second story windows and just shattering them on the ground. And it was just like I mean, it was
flying
awesome.
From their mouths as they stomped out of their McMansions with their Keurigs like over their heads,
Yeah, it was so rad. Like I love when people. Like the issues here are like serious, right? Like
no doubt.
People are getting harassed. It's not great, but like you have to. I cannot not laugh when people get so outraged by like woke behavior that they destroy their own property. Like it's just like straight up funny.
Yeah, that's a benchmark, I think. Right? Like we always must come back to that, no matter how grim the real world implications are. You can't help but sort of hoot and holler at these buffoons expressing performative rage over this or that thing. Yeah.
But the ad cancellation part of it, to me, again, you'll have to apologize. I've been exposed to so much internet that like the timelines of things like this could have happened in 2017 or literally 2014 or last night, and I wouldn't really be able to like totally tell you. But the ad cancellation stuff, like in the history of this timeline, is a big moment, right? When someone gets pressured to pull advertisements, that's like, oh, we went after their wallet. Like that is a seminal moment in this, and a lot of that is because like it ticked up, like media companies would cover this, and what would happen in the early stages of this, right, was like there were some organizations, us at the time at BuzzFeed, because Joe was like steeped in this universe, was able to like cover this in a pretty savvy way. Say like, this is what's happening. These are actually like these awful people are the ones who are like behind this. So like, let's take with a grain of salt all of this stuff. But especially early on, like when you had, say like the New York Times jump into this at the time, like, in the mid aughts, there was like a media reporter, right? Just like a guy who was like, 55 or whatever, who had just been covering, traditional advertising for a long time, be like, oh man, like, look, like this thing's happening, right? They're saying they need to pull. And so you'd get this coverage that wasn't even like reprehensible, right? It just didn't know that this was a bad faith campaign.
Yeah.
Or wasn't totally, keyed into the particulars, or just didn't like see them as super important.
Sure.
And then so like Intel or whoever, right? Like you have the PR department seeing that, or an executive gets a phone call and is like, look at all these people who are mad online. And then they're like, well, like pull the ads, right? Like don't, and so that was a real like, we hadn't been inoculated, right? Like like so many people didn't know about these bad faith campaigns, and so just immediately kind of bought into them. And that is really like, if this was all sort of an online brush fire, like this was the, the wind gust, the gasoline, the whatever, the accelerant that was like, okay, this is like a tried and true template. We can affect, we can make them hurt, essentially.
Yeah. That is a good opportunity. And obviously this is, even though we've talked for 25 minutes about Gamergate, listener, the rabbit hole is deep, and Charlie's done an excellent job of sort of hitting the main points and sort of glazing over some of the maybe sort of lesser subplots, but they are myriad. So if you're interested, Charlie's work, Joe Bernstein's work at BuzzFeed News at the time, many other reporters were on this case who were not getting rolled at the time. Folks at Kotaku, folks at Deadspin when it was still itself. I highly recommend you go check it out.
I should say, just because it would be malpractice to say otherwise, Kyle Wagner, who's writing at Deadspin, wrote this article in the fall of 2014, like, and basically I think the subject line was like, Gamergate is the future of the culture wars.
Yep.
And I mean, it
nailed it.
Maybe more prescient an article there isn't, truly.
Right.
So the work that like I did 5 years later, sort of memorializing that, is really just kind of like contextualizing what he was seeing at the exact moment. But yes, there's a lot of excellent work out there. There's also a lot of like, I mean, these things are interesting to revisit in part because it's like you can look at it with that like, we were so young then kind of thing, or just see like, wow, not a lot has changed. Like a lot has changed in terms of how like how everyone knows their roles in these ecosystems now. But in terms of the like, how it all went down there, it's kind of, it can be both fascinating and depressing to see, how things don't change.
Yeah, no doubt. Good for you. Look at you so graciously avoiding stolen journalism valor by carefully mentioning the colleagues on whose shoulders you stood. Oh my God. That's what Charlie wears out. My goodness, ladies and gentlemen.
There's no new ideas out there. It's just truly, it's just, yeah, everyone's piggybacking off the work of the OGs. So.
Not me though. I wake up every morning, tabula rasa, Charlie. And I get online and I post.
That's why you're that's why you're the king.
Oh, stop it.
That's why you're in the host chair and I'm here.
Well, you're too kind, my friend. My guest. Now we turn our attention to that's all subtext for the text of this episode, which is, of course, Bud Light itself sort of falling for a bad faith campaign that starts in April 2023, 4 years-ish removed from your article in 2019 and 9-ish years removed from GamerGate proper. On April 1st, like I said, Dylan Mulvaney posts this video. Almost immediately, there is an early bad faith sort of campaign amongst the more online right-wing operatives that are kind of the B-listers, like you don't have the Tucker Carlsons and Sean Hannitys of the world scrapping it out on Twitter, but you do have folks like this guy Seth Weathers, Benny Johnson, the disgraced fabulist from BuzzFeed, who would go on to has gone on to have sort of a weirdly successful career in right-wing media, I guess.
Extremely successful.
Yeah, just whatever. But
yikes.
Yikes indeed. But folks like that sort of glommed onto this video and start to, use it as quote-unquote evidence that Bud Light, which is owned by Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is, to be true, the largest beer company in the world. So there's sort of this these sort of vague tropes of globalization and sort of like corporate wokeness run amok, right? Hold this video up as evidence of Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch InBev's and sort of corporate world at large, that their agenda of what they would call transgenderism, which is of course itself kind of a slur. This idea that being trans is an ism, right? Like something that's a cultural affectation.
Yeah, pathology.
Right, a pathology. Yeah, thank you. So this gets a little bit of attention off the bat, but really, what the spark that would light the fire is, I think, April 3rd, so to 48 hours or so after the video goes up. Fucking Kid Rock, you ball with the ball. Posts a video on Twitter where, and he's doing a version of the thing that we described earlier, the Keurig smashing that Hannity provoked in 2017-ish. Kid Rock went out, or one of his lackeys. God, can you imagine being Kid Rock's personal assistant? Like, that's a tough road to hoe, man.
Or it's sick.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, I suppose for the right person, getting an assignment to go down to the local fucking supermarket and buy as much Bud Light as you can find because Kid Rock wants to shoot it with an assault rifle sounds like a cool assignment, I suppose.
That's true. ChatGPT cannot take away that job.
Yeah, that's well put.
Try to automate that.
Yeah, right. So Kid Rock posts this video of him shooting a bunch of Bud Light that he went out and purchased with an assault rifle, saying, fuck Anheuser-Busch, stay away from my kids, that type of thing. Really giving sort of a voice, as you said, and putting a mainstream face, like happened in Gamergate back in 2014. And one of the things that in hindsight, when you were doing your back reporting, experts would come to identify as one of the important sort of vectors for this thing to grow. He puts a big mainstream, or I don't know, he's mainstream, I suppose. Kid Rock is mainstream. Yeah. Big mainstream face on this legitimizes this as sort of a thing and not just sort of gnashing of teeth that happens online. And away we go from there. When did you, Charlie, first clock the Bud Light fiasco? Like, when did this, I mean, you've got so much garbage just flowing into your face by virtue of your beat. When did this first come across the transom for you?
Oh boy.
Where were you when Kid Rock shot the, right?
I mean, honestly, just, it was on Twitter, I'm sure, just being, you know, I'm not really there anymore. But this was, I was there then. I think I don't want to like make it sound like it like actually, you know, like registered. I would say, let me put it this way. I saw the Kid Rock thing, right? Like it was like retweeted into my feed by somebody like poking
Elon
fun
Musk.
at it, most likely.
Right.
And I have sort of two reactions to this type of stuff, right? Which is the initial one where I'm just like, this is really stupid.
Yep.
This is like preposterously dumb. And then the catch in my head that goes, oh, this is really dumb. Clearly I'm going to have to think and talk about it and reckon with it for like easily the next 6 months. Like there's like a scale with this. Like I don't want to like, I whatever, you know, with like, I don't want to necessarily have to like bring Donald Trump into all this, but my example of all this is like, I remember sitting in the newsroom where I was working on the day that Trump came down in the escalator.
The
and I was like,
escalator, yeah.
And I was like, wow, what a stupid spectacle. Can't believe everyone's paying attention to that, you know, and like felt like high and mighty about like, yeah, this guy, whatever, right? Like it's just something because it's like a Wednesday in the summer and like everyone needs something to talk about, whatever. I have learned from that moment that if it registers in my you know, idiot brain as very stupid, it is going to be crucially important to American culture. like anything, like cryptocurrency. I was like, that's dumb.
Yeah.
Nope. Like Bitcoin, you know, to the moon situation. So anyway, that's just kind of how I live my life now. So, this was relatively stupid in my understanding. And so I was like that, like log that one away. That's gonna matter. And to be fair, it outstripped its, the importance that I even thought it would have, right?
Yeah,
these things tend to flare up and then die down, right? And flare up and die down. And especially with things like, you know, I mean, the NFL, I think, is a good one, right? Like the whole Colin Kaepernick kneeling thing became this big right-wing outrage, boycott the NFL, right? I don't want to watch this anymore because they have concussion protocols and, you know, black people play sports.
And
like,
football man, no stand up. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so there's that. And then, that goes away, right? Because it's like, of course, people are going to still watch football, right? And that was exactly the way that I thought the Bud Light thing was going to go, right? Like, oh yeah, they've tried to like boycott like Disney and stuff, but their kids want to go to Disney, and eventually they're just like, whatever, I forgot about it, right? Like life is long, there's more outrage,
right?
But this was really durable. Like I remember when I saw the, you know, Modelo like outpacing in sales, right? Like New York Times article or you know, wherever I saw it or tweet or whatever, maybe from you. And I was like, whoa, holy shit.
Yeah.
like that's not nothing. Right.
Yeah.
And I was revisiting this before we spoke, and I think I have like my own little theory as to why. I don't know if you're going to keep explaining
Please.
Sort of the thing, but you like the thing that you brought up was the InBev, I think it was InBev, but the press release, right? About,
oh man,
like,
they did such a fucking bad job. Yes.
Exactly.
So for 2 weeks, they didn't say fucking anything. They didn't say barely a fucking peep about this. Remained silent and tried to let it blow over. April 1st, the video hits. April 14th, the afternoon of that Friday, they drop a press release, and it is dog shit, Charlie. And I hammered it at the time. I was like, oh, this is going to be way bigger than they think it is. That was the moment where I realized, like, oh shit, they don't know what they're up against.
Right.
And it sounds like it was for you as well.
Yes. So yes, and especially in retrospect, like when you see this, like, I think you described it as like fence sitting, right? Like
Yes.
this just sort of like,
I did, yep.
like, well, there's, very good points on all sides of this here. Like we have a responsibility to America and whatever. That there's one thing that I actually think that ignoring it thing was a reasonable impulse. Like I think a lot of companies and a lot of just entities in American life especially, but like when online culture intersects with it, like they don't realize that like the attention span is short for most of these things. Like most of these things burn really hot and then they extinguish. You don't have to pay attention to it, and it will be clear if you do, right? And so this is a situation where it was clear that they should pay attention. Like I always joke, and I've joked with Joe Bernstein about this, is like becoming like, selling out and becoming like an advisor to companies of like how to deal with the culture war. And be a consultant in that way. And the number one thing in this would be you cannot be mealy-mouthed. Like if you choose to respond, you have to kick a door down. Like you have to choose the door to kick down and like sack up and take a perspective, because otherwise you're toast. Like you either say, Bud Light has a history, right? Because like that was the thing that surprised me. It's like there was a whole history of like support for the LGBT community. Yeah. And stuff like that. If you were to show that, you'd be like, this isn't new for us. This is what we've always, like, if you've been, drinking Bud Light, like you've been supporting. We
have been turning you into a gay frog this whole time, actually.
Exactly. But like, there's a way in which you just say like, no. You're clueless, and if you don't want to get on board, bye. Right? Like that.
You're the past. This is the future. Right. Get fucked, helmet. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, exactly. And in doing so, knowing that, and this kind of happened to some degree, but like, this is the official beer of Pride. This is the official, like beer of people who are, like to have 10 of them, but are also progressive, right? Like there's, like there's a way in which you say like, maybe we need your money, but we don't want it if that's what it costs, right?
Sure.
If that's the cost. And there's so many people in American life and culture now who will stand up and say like, fuck yeah. Or you can say, listen, like, no, we don't want to be involved in this at all. Like this, this is like, you just take a stand. And
you throw them under the bus, you ditch and cut bait and get the fuck out of there. You say that person's fired. We rehired her just to fire her again. We'll never do this again. We made this huge mistake. They did neither of those things.
Right. Yeah. And that is like, sorry, my foot has fallen asleep. That is death. That is.
You are in the danger zone.
Yeah, no, but I mean, but that is like if you do that as a company, if your corporate response is there are very fine people on both sides, that is, it's just, you get no respect, you win no points.
Yep.
Game over. It's going to go as bad as it has to go, because another sort of rule of online corporate PR stuff is crisis PR. Is like figure out what the end game is and get there as quick as possible.
Yeah.
And if that is Bud Light is anti-woke, okay. If that is Bud Light is, the official whatever of whatever, like great. But get there.
Yeah.
That's how the internet works. And this was just proof that like the people there had no idea or were too afraid. And that is also like the last thing that Americans want from something they consume is like afraid and mealy-mouthed.
Yeah. I mean, and it's blood in the water, right? So like from April 14th, when the press release goes out, it inflames the situation in a way that I think ABI just really fundamentally didn't understand and wouldn't understand for months thereafter. They put their CEO, Brendan Whitworth, on with one of the daytime or one of the morning shows. like a month later in May, I want to say, and he got fucking hosed because one of the hosts asked the most fucking obvious question: if like will Bud Light like sponsor like a trans influencer again or like whatever, and he didn't have an answer. He tried to sort of fumble his way, equivocate through it, both sides of the way through it. They did this all summer 2023. In like fall 2023, they started to get wise. And that's when I think whatever corporate sort of intrigue or jockeying was happening amongst decision makers behind the scenes at Anheuser-Busch. And there was a lot of sort of, Kremlinology going on, about that. Not a lot of actually substantiated reporting, but a lot of sort of, oh, look who got fired over here. Look who got placed on indefinite leave, blah, blah, blah. But it seems, in fall 2023, they decided that they of course didn't explicitly say this, but they decided that they were going to tack to the right to appease the transphobes that had been, hammering them all summer and had been legitimately affecting their sales. I mean, there's no doubt about that. In the U.S., Bud Light lost a lot of money last year. Now, again, like Anheuser-Busch InBev, global company, they gained, I think, every quarter. They didn't really, this doesn't affect this big global diversified portfolio, but it's bad for them in this market. I
think it's also shocking given the brand, right? Like that's like, it's just as you mentioned earlier, like it's such a storied like franchise, right? And there, I think that's the rattling thing. Like if this had happened with a different, property that they owned, I think you would like even like traditional Budweiser, right?
Yeah.
Like it would be like, yeah, well, I mean, but
Who
Bud
drinks
Light
that
is
anymore?
just,
Right,
but
yeah.
Bud Light is just like, I think a lot of people probably felt it didn't mean to phrase it this way, bulletproof, right? But like, I think that it was probably really reputationally, like it just freaked them out, right? It shows the power of that boycott in a way that probably wouldn't have been as resonant for the company.
Yeah.
If it was a different property.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. I also think that one thing that was undercovered, and I tried to cover it in my columns when I wrote so much about Bud Light, dude, in 2023. It was unbearable by the end of it. I'm sure you felt the same way about some of the things that you've been, Charlie's dog wants to get in on this.
Sorry.
No, not at
Apologies.
all. I'm sure you felt the same way about Twitter, which you've written about the demise of quite a bit lately. I mean, reporters who are listening to this can sympathize here. Like at some point, you're just so fucking tired of writing these stories again and again with like every new twist of the screw. But I tried to get at this dynamic in the column, and this may not have been as apparent to you, Charlie, because this does not exist in basically any other industrial sector, and certainly not in the tech sector. But Anheuser-Busch InBev's response was impeded to some extent by, whether implicitly or explicitly, by its distribution partners, which are technically independent companies all across the country that distribute, Bud and Bud Light and all their other products. The middle tier, as it's called, tends to be a fairly politically conservative sort of tranche of businessmen. They kind of fit the mode of like car dealers, like the local gentry in any given congressional district. They're wealthy for wherever they live, that's the huge like vocal or not vocal, like relatively silent actually, like Trump majority in these places too. No doubt. Yeah, certainly. And Anheuser-Busch InBev had to try to triangulate. They were getting an enormous amount of inbound from their partners in the middle tier, from their distributors who were rip shit mad about, whether on political grounds or on the grounds of, what the fuck are you doing to this brand? This is bad for my business. There were a lot of people who were very unhappy with Anheuser-Busch that they had to listen to. So like you can, to some extent, you can ignore the online mob and you can make the case that maybe they should have done that here. That's separate from the idea of not picking up their phone when their distributors call.
Yeah.
Distributors are extremely powerful. The power calculus between supplier, which Anheuser-Busch InBev is in the dynamic, and distributor, these independent businesses, has become, there's a lot more parity there because distributors have grown a lot bigger through consolidation, and Anheuser-Busch has lost power through, the more competition in the supplier tier. So they were also hemmed in that regard too, and they weren't really able to, not to excuse them, by the way. Like, I think they handled it very poorly, but they stumbled because of some of the sort of constraints from the business model they had.
But what it speaks to me, hearing all that, and it's a really, I think, important context, but it's just that, like, these things are real life, right? Like, the internet is real life. Like, it has these downstream effects. I think, for a lot of people, it's part of this idea, right? Like, I wrote something a while back, like 3 years ago, that I think that it was a play off of my now colleague Adam Serwer's "The Cruelty is the Point" thing, which was the absurdity is the point. And a lot of times, these online things, like Kid Rock firing a gun at a case of Bud Light, right? Like, it's absurd. It's an absurd gesture. It's not serious, right? In terms of it's the way that it's demonstrated. It's an attention-getting mechanism. All these people are trying to get attention and clout
to build their brands, which, by the way, like that ultra-right, anti-woke beer, that was Seth Weathers, who went viral in the early days of the Bud Light fiasco and then tried to monetize it in the stupidest way possible, by the way, which is launching a beer brand. Beer being one of the most heavily regulated consumer packaged goods that you can fucking sell. Like, you should just stick to t-shirts, dipshit. But anyway, yeah.
And so, there's this, all of this is kind of either like bad faith or, like a scheme, or there's some, there's
grift. It's
ulterior
grift on
motive.
grift. Yeah.
There's an ulterior motive to all of it. But there are people consuming all of the absurdity who are plugged into a very durable culture that takes all of this and makes it a part of their personalities, something that is important, right? Like, it is. I guess what I'm really trying to say is relatively obvious, which is just like, this has downstream effects that are on human beings that are very real, and as a result, it exerts very real pressure. So I think, like, it has been hard. I mean, you still see some of that GamerGate echo throughout all of this, where there's people who are like, what the hell is this? Like, why do I care? I don't care. These people are stupid. These are idiots. Like, you see a lot of that conversation online, right? Like, oh my God, they're throwing Keurigs out the window. They're whatever, And I think, like, the whole Bud Light thing is a really good example of how this has all been formalized. We're 9 years in to that, this playbook
10 now.
Of how to do this, 10 now.
Yeah.
And this has all been formalized to the point where a bunch of shock jock, engagement baiting, dipshit type people can do stuff like this, and it results in people with power making phone calls to a company and actually changing the modes of distribution, which then affects sales, which then do this. Like, I just think, like,
in the upper echelons of corporate and political power, right? These are the legitimate halls of power in American society. Yeah.
And anyone who's been, like, reading your coverage of this, like, knows this. But I think that there's, like, a lesson here is that, like, we make a lot of jokes about how, like, the dumbest stuff, like, now you got to take it seriously, and it's funny to a degree, like, in an sort of dark humor way, that this is the world we live in. But it's also just like, it works. Like, until people figure out how to sort of counter these messages, or companies stop being cowed by this, like, it works. And that's, I think, the bottom line here is that, like, if you can get the distributors to be, or people in those types of positions to be upset,
mad,
and
yep.
exerting their authority, like that's extremely real, as you say, right?
And
like
you get to those people through online discourse, through online,
and and as you've said, like it's not to say like, oh, I totally get it, like InBev, it's like all good. It's not to say that. It's just to say that like, yeah, these are real pressures. And this is the way, like, culture war has an economic component, and it's just like, that's why that Kyle Wagner piece, like, this is the way that we fight now, right? It's true. Like, this is the way that a lot of people operate, whether it's trying to ban a book in a school district somewhere, or it's trying to, get people to stop drinking Bud Light. Like, it all this has effects.
Yes, and it's all connected. I would leave it there, Charlie, but I want to leave you with sort of one more thing, because you mentioned earlier in our conversation that you were shocked by the durability of the Bud Light fiasco. Mm-hmm. I was as well. I mean, I wasn't dismissive of it in the same way that you early on described, sort of clocking it and being like, oh, this is stupid and it's probably important. Let's see what happens. But I was shocked that it ran its course for as long as it did, and it had such an effect. Like I said, I want to just sort of put this in your ear as maybe part of the reason why. In July of 2024, The Guardian published a relatively little noticed scoop based on tax filings that it obtained from groups tied to Leonard Leo, who is the sort of puppet master of the right-wing Supreme Court, the Federalist Society Project. Leo is a reclusive billionaire who has orchestrated that takeover of the court system, and The Guardian obtains records from groups that he had funneled over $15 million to do messaging around anti-woke corporation type stuff. And those groups would, some 6 months after the checks cleared, would seize upon the Anheuser-Busch InBev Bud Light fiasco as sort of a major campaign, and would start blasting out. They were doing text campaigns. They were doing so all of these things that sort of, I couldn't figure out where the connective tissue was between online and offline. I believe there's, sort of a lot of sync up, but I was shocked at how quickly the Bud Light controversy jumped sort of over that firewall between online and offline. And part of the reason may have been that there was a lot of money being sort of pumped into this campaign to fund it. So
totally.
Yeah.
I think it's just like a really good point to bring up here near the end, which is that, like,
I know, sorry to open that door on you.
No. It's super important. What I mean is to say is essentially that there is a lot of now organic outrage, right? But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of inorganic or a lot of like infrastructure behind this, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that does get lost, but
it's designed
very similar.
To get lost.
But it's very similar to, there was this thing that happened over the summer where it was reported that that the Russian state media was funding like right-wing influencers who had already built these networks, right?
Yeah,
they were like, and Benny Johnson was one of them. So
Dim Fool Tim Pool was another. Yeah.
and so what I thought was really telling about that is that these guys have relatively organically built up their brands as, culture warriors or whatever, YouTubers, vloggers, whatever.
Brave
podcasters.
truth tellers. Put some respect on their name, Charlie.
Posters. And as a result, they've, like, those audiences are useful to a lot of people to exploit, right? So that's a relatively organic thing. And then there's this inorganic sort of like, well,
why build our own apparatus when we can launder it through all of this, right? And this outrage machine that is so efficient, that these guys who know how to do it so well. And so I think that that's a really, like, it's a good thing to remember for all of this, which is that, like, were people genuinely upset about this? Yes. Were there people who saw that and were like, here's an opportunity, here's, and used, their means to get that message out in inorganic ways? Like 100%. And that is also a part of this thing. Like when I said, like, the difference between GamerGate and the difference between, like, Bud Light is, back then everyone was creating the roles, right? Like figuring out what worked. It was a very much like pressure testing this, proof of concept kind of thing. And now this system is just like well-oiled, right? Like people are like, oh, there's a controversy. Hold on, they know how to get to their battle stations. They know their job and they do it, and it's efficient. And we get, it's part of why I think something like this worked so quickly and so durably, as opposed to like the slow burn of some of these other scandals, or the short-livedness of some of these other scandals, which is like, this system is primed, it's well-oiled, it's ready to go.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Charlie Warzel, thank you so much for joining Taplines. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. I'm sure our listeners did as well. Charlie, we look forward to maybe getting a beer in person sometime, but for now, we will let you exit the hot seat, exit the Taplines virtual studio. Thanks so much for coming, man.
Thank you for having me. This was lovely. Great to be on your program.
Right on. See you, Charlie.
Take care, man. Bye.
Taplines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mallon, editor-in-chief Joanna Sciarrino, managing editor Tim McCurdy, and art director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Taplines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes, you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.